Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Leadership. On behalf of the entire leadership team, I thank you all for being here today. I know we are kind of all giddy to see each other in person and be in an in-person event, but sorry to break the party and get this started. This is Leadership's 8th year. And since we started this mission of driving the innovation and intellectual property and competition discussion with an empirical and an evidence-based approach, a lot has changed. This platform, this network has grown. And of course, we are all coming back from a pandemic. The geopolitics has evolved. And the importance of innovation and technology leadership has just a renewed meaning for economic growth, for national security. And today's program and discussion reflects this evolution and this nexus. So we have a rich discussion lined up for today with experts that starts with challenges and opportunities in the current geopolitical landscape. And the morning panels discuss the nexus between IP, innovation in critical technology standards, and national security. Right after lunch, we're going to discuss the intersection between IP and competition and the impact it has on the university, on the startup, and on the SME communities. And no technology discussion is complete these days without discussing some of the supply chain issues and what we need to do in the short term and the long term focus. So that's the last panel discussion for today. And finally, we do end the day by looking towards the future. We have somebody from the National Science Foundation talking about the public-private partnerships and a new initiative at NSF to start the discussion about what's happening now and open the discussion for what we should be doing next. So with that, some housekeeping items. This is meant to be an interactive discussion, so please ask questions, comment, speak up. This is being streamed online, so there are online viewers. Let me see if I missed something. Yeah, coffee and lunch will be served here in the foyer, and you can also step out in the tent outside if it's not raining. And we'll all have a cocktail hour at 5 after the day ends. I think we all need that after coming back in person and after a long day. So with that, I just quickly want to thank all the co-sponsors and all the many, many partners of leadership for their support and their efforts. So quickly, this includes, I think we had the icons here, but I'll say them out loud. Baker Bots, Compass Lexicon, Competition Policy International, Covington, Cravath, Morgan & Lewis, Interdigital, IP Watchdog, Nokia, Qualcomm, Sonos. And regardless, none of this happens without a village. There are many people in the organizing steering committee that have been participating in this over the years. So I just want to thank some of you, David Capos, Judge Michelle, Holly Fechner, Bill Victorman, Laurie Self, Nate Tibbetts. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of you, but thank you all. And also the organizing staff, you will see them through the day guiding you. They've done a fantastic job. Elizabeth Duncan, Cindy Ping, Brenda Porter, Angela Meng, Stephanie Pierce, and many, many others. So without further ado, let me ask Alex Rogers. He's the president of Qualcomm Licensing and Global Affairs, a practicing expert in these issues, to come and introduce our keynote for today. Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Curdy. Thanks, everybody, for pulling this together. It's a tremendous effort. It's great to see everybody in person. Thanks to the extended leadership team for all the efforts here. There are a lot of important topics, we have a lot to look forward to today with some very knowledgeable speakers. To start the discussion, we have an excellent keynote speaker, Ambassador Susan Schwab. Ambassador Schwab has extensive experience spanning government, industry, and academia. She has served as U.S. Trade Representative under the Bush administration and has years of experience in settling and negotiating trade disputes with various WTO members and others. Ambassador Schwab has also served as Assistant Secretary and Director General of U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service in the Commerce Department. As an academic, Ambassador has served as the Dean of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, where she still teaches. And Ambassador Schwab also serves and has served on the boards of Caterpillar, FedEx, Boeing, and Marriott, and others. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Susan Schwab.
Alex, thank you very, very much. And leadership and sponsors, thank you for having me here today. I very much appreciate it. This is a terrific opportunity to have a great conversation, and I'm going to kick it off, I hope, by providing some context for the conversation and to set things up for these wonderful panels and this incredible talent here in the room and that will be speaking later on today. And what I wanted to do in terms of context was to focus on the geopolitical, the economic landscape, and its implications for innovation and technology. And since we don't have 3 hours, and since the world is surely going to throw us another curveball within the next 30 minutes or so, I'm really going to focus on just a handful of key observations and then try to flesh a few of those out. So I'm going to start with the key observations. One, the state of volatility that we've been living with is not an aberration. It is the new normal. Get used to it. Two, economic, trade, technology sanctions are and will continue to be the weapons of choice. Get used to it. The pendulum has swung back to an era of industrial policies and managed trade. Those who thought that the era of pursuing the commanding heights is over, history did not end. Get used to it. Market economies and democracies can actually win if we don't screw up. And the private sector corollary to that is there really are opportunities here for the private sector in market economies. The fleet of foot will win, but a new balance is going to be necessary between resilience and efficiency. And ultimately, the analysts, hedge funds, private equity, sources of capital are going to have to factor that into their thinking. So those are the points that I'm going to touch on today. So let's look at a few of these in some more detail. One, unprecedented does not mean it's going to go away. It is not going to go away. And so we've had a lot of attention paid to the volatility in markets, to the volatility in doing business, focused on supply chain disruptions, focused on shocks due to COVID, port congestion, and now obviously the hot war in Europe. Some of these may calm down, some of these may change, but the fact is a lot of this volatility had been building and had been with us long before what we've seen in the last 2 years. We've had trade wars over the last 4 or 5 years. We've had increasing economic nationalism, certainly since 2008, 2009, and I would argue even before that in the case of China. We've had cyber wars, cyber attacks, think NotPetya and others, and risk management in boardrooms clearly has been around for the last several years and is not going away anytime soon, is there with reason. The next item that I talked about was sanctions. Now, some of us are old enough to remember COCOM. Looking around the room here, most of us are not old enough to remember COCOM, but there are a few of us are old enough to remember COCOM. So economic, technology controls, foreign policy sanctions. Some of us are old enough to remember the Soviet grain embargo. Most of us in this room are not. foreign policy sanctions, technology controls, economic sanctions have been around a very, very long time. But to the extent that we have seen in this era a juxtaposition of that which is economic and technology and commercial juxtaposed against geopolitics and geostrategy in a way that we really have not encountered, I would argue, since the post-World War II era in, for example, the Marshall Plan, or setting up the Bretton Woods institutions, the GATT, and so on, sort of the positive version of that juxtaposition. We are now seeing a juxtaposition of that which is economic and commercial and technological, and that which is foreign policy in an unprecedented manner, and it's not going away anytime soon. And the weaponization of economics and trade is here to stay, and some would argue it has, again, been with us for some time, but it is amped up dramatically. And that is particularly true in an era where some of the key players have had as a stated objective technological supremacy, economic and commercial supremacy in the commercial arena. And we're not, again, just talking about the military-industrial complex. We are talking about the commercial realm as well. And here, the crossover sectors are far greater than they ever have been before. And so what are we talking about? Obviously, communications. We've talked about 5G, AI, drones. I mean, the list is as long as your arm. And that crossover makes for a rivalry and the potential for weaponization of trade and economics and technology almost inevitable when you see what happens when you've got a hot war, a kinetic war going on. The pendulum. For one brief shining moment, it looked like governments had abandoned overregulation. Governments had abandoned intervention in markets, and we're letting markets flourish, and democracies were flourishing, and open information was flourishing. That appears to have dissipated. It certainly has dissipated in authoritarian countries, where we have a dramatic reemergence of authoritarianism, autarky in the trade realm. But even in democracies and even in traditional market economies, we see a dramatic step up in government interventions in markets in the form of regulation, in the form of subsidies, and in the sense that governments, various governments, and there's a continuum here, feeling that they know better than markets. Where does that take us, and what does that mean? The potential, obviously, is for overregulation. The potential is for governments picking winners and losers. And in a democracy that often, actually, in a democracy and an autocracy, that often means losers. It certainly means the loudest and the most politically connected and the most corrupt often get the money. So you have to figure out a mechanism to balance. At dinner last night, a number of us were talking about the breakup of AT&T and how one could probably draw a straight line from the breakup of AT&T, the end of Bell Labs, to where Huawei and 5G is today. We can have that conversation offline, but I could draw that straight line, and I think many of us in the room here could draw that straight line. So what are our friendly antitrust regulators going to do to us next? The competition is a global competition. It is not just a competition within our four walls. Four, there is indeed a role for government. So I am not a laissez-faire, let it all go. There is a need for regulation, I believe, at the margins. Bad things can happen if you don't regulate, but there is a limit. And there is also a need for creating an environment, a role for government to create an environment within which innovation, entrepreneurship, economic growth can flourish. And here I'm talking about the obvious things, right? Education. You look at the higher ed system in the United States. This is a little self-serving, obviously. But you look at higher ed in the United States, you look at STEM education, you look at the kind of talent we are able to attract here in the United States to our universities. Why can't they stay? And you look at our immigration policy and our visa policy and you think, why are we letting these individuals go home if they want to stick around? There's a brain drain going on in Russia right now. Where are those folks going? The young people who are looking at their potential future in Russia and going, it ain't going to happen here. Where are they going? Where would their opportunities be? How can we make sure that our K through 12 education system is bringing along our own kids so that they can flourish in our higher ed programs and take advantage of the knowledge economy going forward? So education is one. A sensible immigration program, another example. IP protection, obvious, no-brainer. Sensible financing. In some cases, subsidies, sad to say. When the other side is subsidizing the bejesus out of certain sectors, you may want to create a CHIPS type program. On the other hand, if you look at some of our trade policies have tended to favor last year's industries, not next year's industries, or last decade's or last century's industries, not next century's industries. I didn't say that. At least I didn't say it on the record. So my last point, actually corollary to the fourth point, which is the role for private sector and public sector to work together in the United States and in other market economies and in other democracies. Clearly, that is the right path. And it's not an easy path. I mean, there is no question that democracies and market economies have looked clumsy. I'm being polite. Some democracies have looked clumsy in the past couple years. On the other hand, in contrast to what we see with autocracies and autarkies, I'll take our system any day of the week. Thank you very much. And there are an awful lot of other people who would take our system and our problems any day of the week compared to what we are seeing. And let me just take a moment here to talk specifically about China and people who have heralded the China model. And I've had the great privilege and great challenge of negotiating with and speaking with Chinese friends and counterparts for many years now, both in the private sector and in government. And there are some things that the Chinese government does well, and there are a lot of things that they do really badly. And one thing that we tend to forget is that the Chinese government throws a lot of money at a lot of things. And a lot of that is wasted. And those of you who follow Chinese exports and dumping issues and overcapacity issues, that's China exporting its economic mistakes, is really what it is. And we've seen it in solar panels, and we've seen it in steel, and we've seen it in aluminum, and we've seen it in sector after sector after sector. And we may see it in semiconductors. And we need to keep an eye on that. But the fact is, there are a lot of mistakes made there, and this, quote, model is not necessarily one that one wants to emulate. So 5, and finally, private sector. We've talked about risk management. What will the winners look like? The winners will be the fleet of foot. And as I said, I don't see that being the autocracies and the authoritarian regimes. I think the private sector in the United States and in other market economies and democratic institutions have a terrific opportunity out there. The innovativeness and the creativity, the free flow of information, which is being stifled in so many countries, the free flow of information is critical to that. The free flow of people and ideas, deep capital markets, deep exchanges have to continue, and countries figuring out how to work together in coalitions and to resist the urge to go so economic nationalistic that you lose out on the opportunities of economic and technological and innovative coalitions of the willing. We talk about coalitions of the willing in defense terms. We need to be thinking about coalitions of the willing in economic and technological and innovation terms. So I'm going to stop there. And you've just got a terrific group of experts ahead of you today. And I very much appreciate the invitation to kick this off and hope that provides some context. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day.